There is a profound and unsettling transformation that happens to the world in the dead of night. Familiar places become alien landscapes, shrouded in shadow and silence. The comforting noises of the day are replaced by a quiet so deep that every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of leaves outside sounds like a gunshot. It is a time when the rational mind gives way to a more primal, ancient fear, the fear of the dark. Our homes, which feel like impenetrable fortresses in the daylight, suddenly feel like fragile, vulnerable shells. The dead of night is a canvas for our worst anxieties. It is the time when the line between a harmless shadow and a waiting threat becomes impossibly thin. The stories that unfold in these silent, lonely hours are often the most terrifying, because there is no one to hear you, no one to help you, and nowhere to run. The only witness is the darkness itself. Tonight, we present 3 more allegedly true stories from people who found themselves wide awake in the dead of night, confronted by a horror that the daylight could never reveal. From a strange sound that is closer than it seems, to a game that is not a game, to a visitor who was never invited, these accounts are a chilling reminder that the most terrifying monsters always come out after dark. Our first story tonight comes from a college student named Sarah, who was living alone for the first time in a small ground-floor apartment. She learned that in the dead of night, even the most familiar sounds can become a source of profound terror, especially when you can't identify their source. Her experience is a chilling and deeply paranoid account of how a simple rhythmic noise turned her safe, cozy apartment into a psychological trap. She discovered that the most terrifying threats are the ones that play by their own, unknowable rules, and that the silence between the sounds can be even more frightening than the sounds themselves. I had just moved into my first solo apartment, a small one-bedroom unit on the ground floor of an older, slightly run-down building. I was thrilled to finally have my own space, my own little sanctuary. The first few weeks were great. I loved the freedom, the quiet, but my apartment had one major quirk. The layout was strange. My bedroom was at the very back of the unit, and its only window faced a dark, narrow, and seldom used alleyway that ran between my building and the one next to it. It was a creepy view, so I kept the blinds permanently closed. This detail would soon become the focal point of my terror. The knocking started on a Monday night. I was in bed, drifting off to sleep around 1 a.m., when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic knock. Knock, knock, knock. It sounded like it was coming from my front door. I got up, a little annoyed, and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I figured it was just a neighbor at the wrong door and went back to bed. But the next night, at the exact same time, it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. I checked the peephole again. Nothing. This time, a little prickle of unease went down my spine. It was strange, but I dismissed it as the building's old pipes. The third night, the knocking came again, right on schedule. Knock, knock, knock. But this time, it was different. It was louder, more insistent, and it no longer sounded like it was coming from my front door. It sounded like it was coming from my bedroom window, the one that faced the dark alley. I froze in my bed, my heart starting to pound. That was impossible. My window was a good 10 feet from the ground, with no fire escape or ledge. There was no way for anyone to be up there. I told myself I was imagining it, that the sound was just traveling in a weird way through the old building. The next night, I was dreading 1 a.m. I lay in my bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling, listening, and right on cue, the knocking started. Knock, knock, knock. It was undeniably coming from my bedroom window now. It was a clear, sharp, distinct sound, like someone was rapping their knuckles against the glass. I was terrified. I quietly slipped out of bed, my body trembling, and crept into the living room. I spent the rest of the night on my couch, huddled under a blanket, listening to the periodic, rhythmic knocking on my bedroom window, a sound that should not have been possible. This became my new, horrifying routine. Every night at 1 a.m., the knocking would start, and I would flee to the living room, too scared to stay in my own bedroom. I started to lose sleep. I was jumpy, paranoid, and exhausted. I told my landlord about it, but he just laughed at me, saying it was probably a tree branch. There were no trees in that narrow, brick-lined alleyway. I told my friends, and they thought I was being overly dramatic, suggesting it was just my imagination running wild in a new, creepy apartment. No one believed me. I felt like I was losing my mind. After a week of this psychological torture, I decided I had to get proof. I took my laptop into my bedroom and set it up on my dresser with the webcam pointed directly at the closed blinds of the window. I started a video recording, and then, with a feeling of dread, I left the room and went to the living room to wait. I sat on my couch, watching the clock. At exactly 1 a.m., I heard it again, muffled from the other room. Knock, knock, knock. It continued for about an hour, as it always did, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. I waited until the sun was up before I dared to go back into my bedroom. With my heart pounding, I went to my laptop and stopped the recording. I took the laptop back to the living room, the safe room, and I sat down to watch the footage. For the first hour of the video, it was just a silent, grainy, black and white shot of my closed blinds. I was starting to think that maybe the sound wasn't loud enough to be picked up, or that I really was going crazy. But then, at the exact moment the clock in the corner of the screen ticked over to 1:00 a.m., it happened. The blinds on my window began to shake violently, as if someone was on the other side, banging on the glass with their fists. The sound was loud and clear on the video, a series of 3 sharp, aggressive knocks, repeated over and over. Knock, knock, knock. The video was my validation. It was proof that I wasn't crazy, but the visual that accompanied the sound was 1,000 times more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical, violent assault on my window, happening 10 feet up, in an empty, inaccessible alley. But that wasn't the part that made me scream. That wasn't the part that made me break my lease and move out that very same day. As I watched the recording, my eyes fixed on the shaking blinds, I noticed something else in the video frame, something I had missed in my own room. In the bottom corner of the screen, just visible under my bed, was a hand. It was a pale, long-fingered hand, emerging from the deep shadow under the dust ruffle, and it was knocking, softly, rhythmically, on the wooden leg of my bed frame. Knock, knock, knock. I rewound the video, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. The knocking sound that I had been hearing, the sound I was so sure was coming from my window, it had been a distraction. It was a loud, aggressive noise designed to draw my attention, my fear, my entire focus, to the other side of the room. The real source of the sound, the true horror, had been right underneath me the entire time. A man had been hiding under my bed, night after night, silently watching me, and playing a horrifying, patient, and deeply personal game with me. The loud banging on the window in the video. I realized it was a sound I had never actually heard in person. The recording had picked it up, but I hadn't heard it from the living room. It was then that I understood the full, mind-shattering horror of the situation. The man under my bed had been using a device, probably a small speaker, to project the sound of knocking onto my window, creating an impossible and terrifying mystery. He was a master of psychological manipulation, a puppeteer pulling the strings of my fear. He wasn't just a simple intruder. He was a predator who enjoyed the hunt, who savored the slow, methodical process of breaking down his victim's sanity. He had been living in my home, a silent, nocturnal parasite, for over a week. He had watched me sleep. He had listened to my panicked phone calls to my friends, and every night he had lain there, just inches beneath me, and had performed his little symphony of terror, tapping on my bed frame, a quiet, intimate act of violation that I had been completely oblivious to. I moved out that day. I left most of my belongings behind. I just wanted to get away. The police swept the apartment. They found evidence that the screen on the alley window had been cut and that someone had been climbing in and out. They also found a small, high-frequency audio device under my bed, capable of projecting sound with a surprising degree of precision. They found his nest, the place where he had been hiding, but the man himself was long gone. He had vanished as silently as he had arrived, a ghost in the machine of my life. I will never live in a ground-floor apartment again. I will never sleep in a bed with a dust ruffle, and I will never ever be able to hear a simple, rhythmic knocking sound without feeling a wave of ice-cold, paralyzing terror wash over me. That man didn't just break into my home. He broke into my mind. He taught me that the most terrifying threats are not the ones that you can see, but the ones that you can hear. And he taught me that sometimes, when you think the monster is on the outside trying to get in, it's because he is already on the inside, quietly and patiently waiting for you to fall asleep. Our second story is a deeply unsettling account from a man named David, who found himself home alone one night while his wife was out of town. His experience is a chilling exploration of the vulnerability we feel in the dead of night, and how easily our sense of safety can be shattered by a single, inexplicable event. He learned that the person who knocks on your door in the middle of the night is not always a stranger in need of help. Sometimes they are something else entirely, a patient and methodical predator who wants to see if you are foolish enough to open the door and let them into your world. My wife, Jessica, was away on a business trip for the week, leaving me alone in our small suburban house for the first time since we had moved in. I'm not the kind of guy who gets spooked easily, but I have to admit, the house feels different when you're the only one in it. Every creak and groan of the old structure, usually lost in the background noise of a shared life, becomes loud and distinct in the silence. The first few nights were fine. I settled into a routine of work, a late dinner, and watching a movie before bed. The silence was my companion, and I was getting used to it. The incident happened on a Thursday, the last night before Jessica was due to come home. It was late, probably around 2 a.m. I had fallen asleep on the couch watching a movie and was woken up by a sound. It was a soft, hesitant knock at the front door. I sat up, my mind groggy with sleep, and tried to process it. Who would be knocking on my door at this hour? My first thought was that it was a neighbor in trouble, or perhaps a police officer with bad news. I got up from the couch and walked to the front door, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I looked through the peephole. Standing on my porch, illuminated by the dim yellow porch light, was a woman. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with long, dark hair. She was wearing a simple, thin dress, completely inadequate for the chilly autumn night. She was shivering, and her face was streaked with what looked like tears. She looked distressed and vulnerable. She wasn't looking at the door. She was looking down at her bare feet, as if she was ashamed. My immediate instinct was one of sympathy. She was clearly in some kind of trouble, and I felt a pang of responsibility. But something held me back. Something felt off. It was the way she was standing, perfectly still, almost like a statue, and her silence. She had knocked, but she wasn't calling out for help. She was just waiting. My police officer father's voice echoed in my head from a childhood of warnings. Never, ever open the door to a stranger in the middle of the night. You don't know who's waiting just out of sight. I decided to speak to her through the closed door. Hello? Can I help you? I called out, my voice louder than I intended in the quiet house. She didn't respond for a long moment. Then, without looking up, she spoke. Her voice was a soft, fragile whisper, almost lost to the sound of the wind. I'm lost, she said. My car broke down. Can I please just use your phone? It was a classic, believable story, but the feeling of wrongness was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. I'm sorry, I can't let you in, I said, feeling like a monster. But I can make a call for you. Who do you need me to call? The police? A tow truck? This was the test. A real person in trouble would have immediately accepted my offer. Again, there was a long, heavy silence. She slowly, very slowly lifted her head, and my blood ran cold. Her face was not the face of a frightened, crying young woman. The tear streaks were gone. Her expression was completely, utterly blank. And her eyes, they were wide, dark, and completely devoid of any emotion, like the eyes of a shark. Then she smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was a slow, deliberate, and predatory grin that stretched a little too wide across her face. A smile of pure, cold, and triumphant malice. It was the smile of a hunter who has just cornered its prey. That's okay, she said, her voice no longer a fragile whisper, but a low, confident, and mockingly sweet purr. We can wait. And as she said the word we, a second figure stepped out from the deep shadows of the large oak tree on my front lawn, just beyond the reach of the porch light. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, a dark silhouette against the night. He had been there the whole time, waiting silently. In the darkness, completely hidden from my view through the peephole. My father's warning had been chillingly, terrifyingly accurate. She was the bait. He was the trap. I stumbled back from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I scrambled to find my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. I dialed 911, my voice a panicked whisper as I explained the situation. As I was on the phone, I heard a new sound from the front door. It was a soft, scraping noise. I crept back to the peephole and looked out. The woman was still standing there, her face fixed with that same horrible, wide-eyed smile. But she was now dragging a single, long fingernail slowly down the wood of my front door, leaving a thin, white scratch in the paint. It was an act of quiet, patient, and deeply personal vandalism. It was a message. It was a promise. She was marking her territory, claiming my home as her own. She knew I was on the phone. She knew I was watching her. She didn't care. The man was still standing by the tree, a silent, menacing statue. They were in no hurry. The fear was the point, the waiting, the psychological torment. That was the game they were playing. They weren't just trying to get into my house. They were trying to break into my mind, to shatter my sense of safety forever. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, a lifetime in the currency of terror. The moment the distant sound of their sirens began to cut through the night, the woman stopped scraping the kag. Doctor. Her smile vanished, replaced once again by that blank, emotionless expression. She and the man exchanged a look, a silent, imperceptible communication. And then, as calmly and as quietly as they had appeared, they both turned and simply walked away, melting back into the shadows of the neighborhood just as the first police car pulled up to my curb. They were gone. When I opened the door to the police, my porch was empty. There was no sign of them, except for the one, long, thin scratch that ran down the center of my front door, a permanent scar from the night's events. The police did a sweep of the neighborhood, but they found no one. There were no reports of a broken-down car. No one else had seen the strange couple. To the police, it was just a failed and very strange home invasion attempt. But to me, it was something far more sinister, far more personal, and far more terrifying. I have come to believe that they were not common criminals. They were something else. They were nocturnal predators who cruised the quiet, sleeping suburbs in the dead of night, looking for a target. They were hunters, and their game was a simple, terrifying test of compassion versus caution. They would knock, they would present a story of vulnerability, and they would wait. They were looking for that one person who was kind enough or foolish enough to unlatch the deadbolt and open the door, and I have no doubt in my mind about what would have happened if I had. The scratch on my front door is still there. I never painted over it. I've left it as a reminder, a constant physical testament to the night I came face to face with the monsters that hide behind human masks. It reminds me that the world is not as safe as it looks, and that the dead of night has its own set of rules and its own special breed of hunter. It reminds me of the lesson my father tried to teach me all those years ago. You never, ever open the door. That night changed me. The silence of my own home is no longer a comfort. It is a source of anxiety. Every unexpected sound, every creak, every knock sends a jolt of fear through me. I find myself checking the peephole at all hours of the night, half expecting to see her standing there, with her blank, shark-like eyes and her slow, terrible smile, waiting patiently for me to make a mistake. The lock on my door is no longer just a piece of metal. It is the only thing that separates my world from theirs, the only thing that keeps the patient, smiling monsters of the night at bay. Our final story tonight comes from a new father named Tom, whose life had been recently and beautifully transformed by the birth of his first child. His experience is a chilling exploration of parental fear and the fierce primal instinct to protect one's family. He learned that in the dead of night, the most innocent sounds can become the most terrifying, and that a threat doesn't have to be loud to be deadly. He discovered that the silence of a suburban backyard can be a hunting ground, and that the monster who comes in the night is not always after you, but after the one thing in the world you cannot bear to lose. My daughter Chloe was only 6 months old, and my life had become a chaotic but wonderful cycle of feeding, changing diapers, and sleepless nights. My wife Anna and I were exhausted, but we were happier than we had ever been. We lived in a quiet, safe, suburban neighborhood, the kind of place people move to when they want to start a family. Our small house had a tiny backyard enclosed by a tall wooden privacy fence. The centerpiece of the yard was a brand new swing set that my father-in-law had just helped me build. It was a promise of future summer days, of laughter and play. We hadn't even used it yet. The incident happened on a Saturday night in early spring. Anna was a deep sleeper, but I had developed what I called dad ears, a state of hyper-awareness to any sound related to the baby. Around 3 a.m., I was woken up from a light sleep by a noise. It was a soft, rhythmic, and deeply familiar sound, but it was in the wrong place and at the wrong time. It was the gentle, repetitive creak of the new swing set in our backyard. Squeak, squeak, squeak. It was the sound of someone swinging, slowly and steadily, in the pitch-black darkness of my yard. My blood ran cold. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. My first thought was that it was just the wind, pushing one of the empty swings back and forth. But there was no wind that night. The air was perfectly still. I crept to the window in our master bedroom, which overlooked the backyard. I slowly, carefully, parted the blinds just enough to peer outside. The yard was bathed in the faint, silvery light of a full moon, and my worst fears were confirmed. The swing set was not empty. There was a figure, a dark silhouette, sitting on one of the swings, moving back and forth in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. I couldn't make out any details. It was just a human-shaped mass of darkness against the pale grass. They were not swinging high, not playfully. It was just a gentle, constant, and deeply unsettling motion. Who would be in my fenced-in backyard at 3 a.m. just swinging? My mind raced through 1,000 terrifying possibilities. Was it a drunk neighbor who had wandered into the wrong yard? Was it a teenager playing a prank? Or was it something far, far worse? My protective instincts, a primal force I never knew I possessed, flared to life with the intensity of a forest fire. I knew I couldn't just stand there. My wife and my baby daughter were asleep, vulnerable just a few feet away from me. I crept out of the bedroom and silently made my way downstairs to the kitchen. I grabbed the heaviest, most solid object I could find, a large cast-iron skillet from the stove. It felt absurd, but it was better than nothing. My plan was simple and stupid. I was going to confront them. I was going to be the protector of my home. I took a deep breath, unlocked the sliding glass door that led to the backyard, and prepared to face the intruder. As I slid the door open, the soft, rhythmic creaking of the swing suddenly stopped. The figure had heard me. The sudden, absolute silence was 1,000 times more terrifying than the noise had been. I stepped out onto the cold patio, my knuckles white as I gripped the handle of the skillet. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice trying to sound brave and authoritative, but cracking with fear. "This is private property. I'm warning you, I've called the police." It was a lie, a desperate bluff. I hadn't had time to call anyone. There was no response, just the heavy, watchful silence. I took another tentative step into the yard, my eyes straining to see into the darkness where the swing set was. The figure was gone. The swing was empty, swaying ever so slightly, a ghost of its former motion. Had I scared them off? Had they slipped over the fence and vanished back into the night? A wave of relief washed over me, so intense it almost made my knees buckle. I had done it. I had protected my family. I took a few more steps forward, scanning the shadows along the fence line, just to be sure. I was so focused on the perimeter of the yard, on the possible escape routes, and that's when I made the mistake. I had assumed the threat was in front of me. I had assumed the intruder had fled. I was wrong. The threat had not fled. It had just relocated. As I stood in the middle of my own lawn, a dark shape detached itself from the deep shadow directly beneath my back deck, a space I had not even considered. It moved with a silent, inhuman speed, and before I could even turn, something hard and heavy slammed into the side of my head. The world exploded in a flash of white, blinding pain, and then there was only darkness. I woke up on the damp grass, the world spinning, the side of my head throbbing with a searing pain. I don't know how long I was out. A few seconds, a few minutes. I pushed myself up, my mind a confused fog. My first panicked thought was of Anna and Chloe. I scrambled to my feet and stumbled back towards the house, towards the open sliding glass door. As I got to the door, I saw it. On the pristine white frame of the door, there was a single, fresh handprint made in the mud from my own garden. It was not my handprint. It was too small, too slender, and it was placed very, very low on the door frame, only about 3 feet from the ground. It was the handprint of a child. It was a dirty, perfect, and terrifying little handprint, a sign that someone small had used the frame to steady themselves as they stepped inside my home. My heart stopped. The person on the swing, the one who had attacked me, they were not the real threat. They were a distraction, a decoy. Their entire purpose was to draw me out, to get me to leave the safety of my house and to open the only unlocked door. I screamed my wife's name as I scrambled. Inside, my mind a whirlwind of pure, unadulterated terror. I ran through the dark house and up the stairs, my broken head forgotten, my entire being focused on a single horrifying possibility. I burst into the nursery, my eyes frantically searching the crib in the corner of the room. And there, in the dim light from the hallway, I saw her. My daughter, Chloe, was sleeping peacefully in her crib, completely unharmed. A wave of relief so powerful it felt like a physical blow washed over me, and I collapsed against the door frame, sobbing. But as my breathing returned to normal, I saw something that made the terror come rushing back, colder and sharper than before. The baby monitor on the dresser, a video monitor that was always pointed directly at Chloe's crib, had been moved. It was now turned to face the wall, and on the wall, directly in the camera's new line of sight, someone had used a dark, muddy finger to draw a single, simple, and horrifying image. It was a crude, childlike, drawing of a smiling face. It was a message, a signature, a promise. The person who had been swinging in my yard, the one who had attacked me, had been working with a partner who was small enough to slip into my house unnoticed while I was distracted. They hadn't come to steal anything. They hadn't come to harm us, not yet. They had come to show me that they could. They had come to prove that they could get to the most precious thing in my world anytime they wanted. The muddy handprint, the smiling face, the moved camera. It was all a terrifying, silent statement of their power, a demonstration of my complete and utter vulnerability. The police found nothing. No footprints, no fingerprints, nothing but the muddy marks that could have been made by anyone. They treated the incident as a probable botched burglary, assuming I had surprised the intruder and they had fled. But I know the truth. This was not a burglary. It was a rehearsal. It was a scouting mission. It was a predator, or predators, who had marked our territory and had taken the time to show us, in the most personal and terrifying way imaginable, that they were now the ones in control. We sold the house and moved to a high-rise apartment in the city the following month. Our new home is a fortress, with security guards and cameras everywhere. But I know that no lock is strong enough, no wall is high enough, to protect you from the kind of people who play games like that. They are still out there, in the dead of night, looking for another quiet house, another happy family. I will never forget the sound of that swing set creaking in the darkness. It is the sound of a patient, silent, and deeply evil intelligence, and it is a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days.